I got involved in the Nirvana In Utero record when Kurt called me and asked me if I'd be willing to do it. In Utero, they did intentionally want to make a more primitive record. And by primitive, I don't mean like a rudimentary record. I just mean a record where the band sound was unvarnished. You would hear when, like, the bulk of the record, the vocals that Kurt is singing are his first take of singing the song. The bulk of the record he sang in one sitting. Like, he sat with this broken acoustic guitar in his lap and had me play the songs back to him, and he would sort of strum along on this acoustic guitar and sing the songs. And that was exactly the way he wanted to present it. It's not that I don't think it's the case that he had an exterior motivation for that. That's just the way he wanted to do it. And personally, I think it's a terrific album. I was not a fan of Nirvana before I started working on that record. I wasn't that familiar with their music. What I had heard of it struck me as pretty much of a type, and the type meaning that Seattle sort of garagey, grungy, slightly punky, slightly detuned, like a sort of hybrid between the Stooges and the Melvins. Like I kind of had that impression of their music without listening to it very carefully. The Nevermind album blew up, became super huge. I have to admit that I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I wasn't really didn't listen to it carefully. I didn't own a copy. But what I had heard of it didn't really appeal to me. Having said that, while we were working on the In Utero album, the band had cassette dubs of the album as it was originally recorded with Butch Vig, and those cassette dubs were what they would listen to as a band when they were discussing that album. And I thought those cassette dubs sounded fantastic. Like, I have to give credit to Butch Vig. He's a terrific engineer. He's very sympathetic. He had been doing a lot of great stuff with a lot of bands that had inspired Nirvana. You know, bands like Killdozer and Laughing Hyenas. Like, those bands are bands that inspired Nirvana. And Butch made those records, and those records sound awesome. So I full credit to Butch Vig for making a great record, or a great sounding record. When it finally made its way through the process of being remixed at the behest of the label, it didn't appeal to me as a listener, but it probably wasn't supposed to. So, anyway. The In Utero album was done fairly quickly. We were done in 12 or 14 days. The band left the studio really happy with it. I left the studio really happy with it. As soon as they got home, they started getting advice from people not in the band, and all of that advice was fraught with fear. Like, don't put out a scary record right now. Put out another happy, pretty record that dumbasses will like. And to their credit, Nirvana largely ignored that advice. They developed some reservations of their own about their record, which is totally normal. And I think partly because they had been being told by other people that their record was bad, and partly because they had these minor doubts on their own, they made some changes to a couple of songs. They remixed a couple of songs. Those remixes and the original album masters were then sent to a professional mastering studio where a guy who's known as the mastering guy for professional hit records did his mastering magic on them. And there was a lot of work done in the mastering. The mastering changed the sound quality of the record quite a bit. When I heard the finished result, which had a couple of remixes plus the original mixes that had gone through this mastering process, it didn't sound familiar to me, and I thought it sounded not so great relative to what I had heard in the studio. There are a couple of caveats here. When I said that was taking into consideration the LP format, and it's a very long record. Like, the side lengths, I think, are 25 minutes, 22, 25 minutes, something like that. It's really difficult to make a good sounding vinyl record of that length. It can be done, but it takes a lot of attention to detail. You probably have to cut it direct into metal, DMM. I'm going to break technically for a minute here. Instead of cutting into lacquer, you're cutting DMM. You probably have to cut directly from the analog masters rather than cutting from at that point, a fairly crude digital file. In order to make a record of quality that has side lengths that long, you have to take extraordinary steps. And obviously, no one in the process thought it was worth taking extraordinary steps. So, those technical caveats aside, the record in the store is the record Nirvana wanted you to hear. I have no problem with that. Like, it's their band, their record. They should be the ones to make those decisions. And in this case, under a hailstorm of criticism, they did make some decisions, and that's how the record came out. I am really pleased that I have been involved in the remastering of the original version of In Utero, which is being released at some point this year. I'm really pleased that I was able to be involved in that project, and we were able to take extraordinary steps to make a good sounding LP version of that record. So I'm very pleased that I was asked to be a participant in it, and I did take every step I could to make sure that the vinyl edition is going to be as good a quality as is possible.